Edward Hopper, July 22nd, 1882 to May 15, 1967, was an American realist painter and printmaker. While he is widely known for his oil paintings, he was equally proficient as a watercolourist and printmaker in etching. Hopper created subdued drama out of commonplace subjects, layered with a poetic meaning, inviting narrative interpretations. He was praised for complete verity in the America he portrayed. His career benefited significantly from his marriage to fellow artist Josephine Nivison, who contributed much to his work, both as a life model and as a creative partner. Hopper is one of America's most renowned artists. His influence on art and popular culture has been substantial. Amongst his best-known paintings are New York Movie, 1939, and Nighthawks, 1942. Hopper was born in 1882 in Nyack, New York, a yacht-building centre on the Hudson River, north of New York City. He was one of two children of a comfortably well-off family. His parents, of mostly Dutch ancestry, were Elizabeth Griffiths Smith and Garrett Henry Hopper, a dry goods merchant. Although not as successful as his forebears, Garrett provided well for his two children with considerable help from his wife's inheritance. He retired at age 49. Edward and his sister Marion attended both private and public schools. They were raised in a strict Baptist home. His father had a mild nature and the household was dominated by women: Hopper's mother, grandmother, sister and maid. His birthplace and boyhood home was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in the year 2000. It is now operated as the Edward Hopper House Museum and Study Centre, serving as a non-profit community cultural centre featuring exhibitions, workshops, lectures, performances and special events. Hopper was a good student in grade school, and by the time he was 5, his talent with drawing was already apparent. He readily absorbed his father's intellectual tendencies and love of French and Russian cultures. He also demonstrated his mother's artistic heritage. Hopper's parents encouraged his art and kept him amply supplied with materials, instructional magazines and illustrated books. Hopper first began signing and dating his drawings at the age of 10. Amongst the earliest of these drawings are charcoal sketches of geometric shapes, a vase, bowl, cup and boxes. The detailed examination of light and shadow that continued throughout his career is already visible in these early works. By his teens, he was working in pen and ink, charcoal, watercolour and oil, drawing from nature while also making political cartoons. In 1895, he created his first signed oil painting, Rowboat in Rocky Cove, which he copied from a reproduction in the Art Interchange, a popular journal for amateur artists. Hopper's other earliest oils, such as Old Ice Pond at Nyack and his around 1898 painting Ships, have been identified as copies of paintings by artists including Bruce Crane and Edward Moran. In his early self-portraits, Hopper tended to represent himself as skinny, ungraceful and homely. Though a tall and quiet teenager, his prankish sense of humour found outlet in his art, sometimes in depictions of immigrants or of women dominating men in comical situations. Later in life, he mostly depicted women as the figures in his paintings. In high school, he graduated from Nyack High School in 1899. He dreamed of becoming a naval architect, but after graduation declared his intention to pursue a career in art. Hopper's parents insisted that he study commercial art to have a reliable means of income. In developing his self-image and individualistic philosophy of life, Hopper was influenced by the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He later said, "I admire him greatly. I read him over and over again."
All night long and most of the day, you can hear a lucky laddie sing, "Oh, she's my baby, my only queen, my baby doll." When I bring the ring around the rose, it's a secret all the world knows, and I know she loves me.
Hopper began art studies with a correspondence course in 1899. Soon he transferred to the New York School of Art and Design, the forerunner of Parsons School of Design. There he studied for 6 years with teachers, including William Merritt Chase, who instructed him in oil painting. Early on, Hopper modelled his style after Chase and French Impressionistic masters Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas. Sketching from live models, however, proved challenging and somewhat shocking for the conservatively raised Hopper. Another of his teachers, artist Robert Henry, taught life class. Henry encouraged his students to use their art to make a stir in the world. He also advised his students, "It isn't the subject that counts, but what you feel about it. And forget about art and paint pictures of what interests you in life." In this manner, Henry influenced Hopper as well as future artists George Bellows and Rockwell Kent. He encouraged them to imbue their work with a modern spirit. Some artists in Henry's circle, including John Sloan, became members of the Eight, also known as the Ashcan School of American Art. Hopper's first surviving oil painting to hint at his use of interiors as his theme was Solitary Figure in a Theatre around 1904. During his student years, he also painted dozens of nudes, still life studies, landscapes and portraits, including self-portraits. In 1905, Hopper landed a part-time job with an advertising agency where he created cover designs for trade magazines. Hopper came to detest illustration. He was bound to it by economic necessity until the mid-1920s. He temporarily escaped by making 3 trips to Europe, each centered in Paris, ostensibly to study its art scene. In fact, he mostly worked alone and seemed mostly unaffected by the new currents in art. Later, he said he didn't remember hearing of Picasso at all. He was highly impressed by Rembrandt, particularly his Night Watch, which he said was the most wonderful thing of his I have seen. It's past belief in its reality. Hopper began painting urban and architectural scenes in a dark palette. Then he shifted to the lighter shades of the Impressionists before returning to the darker palette, with which he was most comfortable. He later said, "I got over that, and later things done in Paris were more of the kind of things I do now." Hopper spent much of his time drawing street and cafe scenes and going to the theatre and opera. Unlike many of his contemporaries who imitated the abstract cubist experiments, Hopper was attracted to realist art. Later, he claimed few European influences other than Rembrandt, Goya, and the French engraver Charles Marion, whose moody Paris scenes Hopper imitated. Years of struggle. After returning from his last European trip, Hopper rented a studio in New York City where he struggled to define his own style. Reluctantly, he returned to illustration to support himself. Being a freelancer, Hopper was forced to solicit for projects and had to knock on the doors of magazine and agency offices to find business. His painting languished. "It's hard for me to decide what I want to paint. I go for months without finding it sometimes. It comes slowly." His fellow illustrator Walter Tittle described Hopper's depressed emotional state in sharper terms, seeing his friend suffering from long periods of unconquerable inertia, sitting for days at a time before his easel in helpless unhappiness, unable to raise a hand to break the spell. In 1912, February 22nd to March 5, he was included in the exhibition of The Independents, a group of artists at the initiative of Robert Henry, but did not make any sales. In 1912, Hopper travelled to Gloucester, Massachusetts to seek some inspiration and made his first outdoor paintings in America. He painted Squam Light, the first of many lighthouse paintings to come. In 1913, at the Armory Show, Hopper earned $250 when he sold his first painting, Sailing, 1911, to an American businessman, Thomas F. Viator, which he had painted over an earlier self-portrait. Hopper was 31, and although he hoped his first sale would lead to others in short order, his career would not catch on for many more years. He continued to participate in group exhibitions at smaller venues such as the McDowell Club of New York. Shortly after his father's death that same year, Hopper moved to 3 Washington Square North apartment in the Greenwich Village section of Manhattan, where he would live for the rest of his life. The following year, he received a commission to create some movie posters and handle publicity for a movie company. Although he did not like the illustration work, Hopper was a lifelong devotee of the cinema and the theatre, both of which he treated as subjects for his paintings. Each form influenced his compositional methods. At an impasse over his oil paintings in 1915, Hopper turned to etching. By 1923, he had produced most of his approximately 70 works in this medium, many of urban scenes of both Paris and New York. He also produced some posters for the war effort, as well as continuing with occasional commercial projects. When he could, Hopper did some outdoor oil paintings on visits to New England, especially at the art colonies of Ogunquit and Monhegan Island. That's a mouthful. During the early 1920s, his etchings began to receive public recognition. They expressed some of his later themes, as in Night on the L Train, Couples in Silence, Evening Wind, Solitary Female, and The Catboat, Simple Nautical Scene. 2 notable oil paintings of this time were New York Interior, 1921, and New York Restaurant, 1922. He also painted 2 of his many window paintings to come, Girl at Sewing Machine and Moonlight Interior, both of which show a figure, clothed or nude, near a window of an apartment viewed as gazing out or from the point of view from the outside looking in. Although these were frustrating years, Hopper gained some recognition. In 1918, Hopper was awarded the U.S. Shipping Board Prize for his war poster, Smash the Hun. He participated in 3 exhibitions, in 1917 with the Society of Independent Artists, in January 1920 a one-man exhibition at the Whitney Studio Club, which was the precursor to the Whitney Museum, and in 1922 again with the Whitney Studio Club. In 1923, Hopper received 2 awards for his etchings, the Logan Prize from the Chicago Society of Etchers and the W.A. Bryan Prize. Marriage and breakthrough. By 1923, Hopper's slow climb finally produced a breakthrough. He re-encountered Josephine Nivison, an artist and former student of Robert Henry, during a summer painting trip in Gloucester, Massachusetts. They were opposites. She was short, open, gregarious, sociable, and liberal, while he was tall, secretive, shy, quiet, introspective, and conservative. With Joe's encouragement, Hopper turned to the medium of watercolour, producing numerous scenes of Gloucester. They married a year later with artist Guy Pen Dubois as their best man. Nivison once remarked, "Sometimes talking to Eddie is just like dropping a stone in a well, except that it doesn't thump when it hits bottom." She subordinated her career to his and shared his reclusive lifestyle. The rest of their lives revolved around their spare walk-up apartment in the city and their summers in South Truro on Cape Cod. She managed his career and his interviews, was his primary model and was his life companion. With Niveson's help, 6 of Hopper's Gloucester watercolours were admitted to an exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum in 1923. One of them, the mansard roof, was purchased by the museum for its permanent collection for the sum of $100. The critics generally raved about his work. One stated, "What vitality, force and directness! Observe what can be done with the homeliest subject." Hopper sold all his watercolours at a one-man show the following year and finally decided to put illustration behind him. The artist had demonstrated his ability to transfer his attraction to Parisian architecture to American urban and rural architecture. According to Boston Museum of Fine Arts curator Carol Troyan, Hopper really liked the way these houses with their turrets and towers and porches and mansard roofs and ornament cast wonderful shadows. Hopper always said that his favourite thing was painting sunlight on the side of a house. At 41, Hopper received further recognition for his work. He continued to harbour bitterness about his career, later turning down appearances and awards. With his financial stability secured by steady sales, Hopper would live a simple, stable life and continue creating art in his personal style for 4 more decades. His Two on the Isle, 1927, sold for a personal record $1,500. Enabling Hopper to purchase an automobile, which he used to make field trips to remote areas of New England. In 1929, he produced Chop Suey and Railroad Sunset. The following year, art patron Stephen Clark donated House by the Railroad, 1925, to the Museum of Modern Art, the first oil painting that it acquired for its collection. Hopper painted his last self-portrait in oil around 1930. Although Josephine posed for many of his paintings, she sat for only one formal oil portrait by her husband, Joe Painting, 1936. Hopper fared better than many other artists during the Great Depression. His stature took a sharp rise in 1931 when major museums, including the Whitney Museum of American Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, paid thousands of dollars for his works. He sold 30 paintings that year, including 13 watercolours. The following year, he participated in the first Whitney Annual, and he continued to exhibit in every annual at the museum for the rest of his life. In 1933, the Museum of Modern Art gave Hopper his first large-scale retrospective. In 1930, the Hoppers rented a cottage in South Truro on Cape Cod. They returned every summer for the rest of their lives, building a summer house there in 1934. From there, they would take driving trips into other areas when Hopper needed to search for fresh material to paint. In the summers of 1937 and 1938, the couple spent extended sojourns on Wagon Wheels Farm in South Royalton, Vermont, where Hopper painted a series of watercolours along the White River. These scenes are atypical amongst Hopper's mature works, as most are pure landscapes, devoid of architecture or human figures. First branch of the White River, 1938, now in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, is the best known of Hopper's Vermont landscapes. Hopper was very productive through the 1930s and early 1940s, producing among many important works New York Movie, 1939, Girly Show, 1941, Nighthawks, 1942, Hotel Lobby, 1943, and Morning in a City, 1944. During the late 1940s, however, he suffered a period of relative inactivity. He admitted, "I wish I could paint more. I get sick of reading and going to the movies." During the next 2 decades, his health faltered and he had several prostate surgeries and other medical problems. But in the 1950s and early 1960s, he created several more major works, including First Row Orchestra, 1951, as well as Morning Sun and Hotel by a Railroad, both in 1952, and Intermission in 1963. In 1966, Hopper was awarded the Edward MacDowell Medal by the MacDowell Colony for outstanding contributions to American culture. Hopper's influence on the art world and pop culture is undeniable. Though he had no formal students, many artists have cited him as an influence, including Willem de Kooning, Jim Dine, and Mark Rothko. An illustration of Hopper's influence is Rothko's early work Composition 1 around 1931, which is a direct paraphrase of Hopper's Chop Suey. Hopper's cinematic compositions and dramatic use of light and dark have made him a favourite among filmmakers. For example, House by the Railroad is reported to have heavily influenced the iconic house in the Alfred Hitchcock film Psycho. The same painting has also been cited as being an influence on the home in the Terrence Malick film Days of Heaven. The 1981 film Pennies from Heaven includes a tableau vivant of Nighthawks with the lead actors in the places of the diners. German director Wim Wenders also cites Hopper influence. His 1997 film The End of Violence also incorporates a tableau vivant of Nighthawks recreated by actors. Noted surrealist horror film director Dario Argento went so far as to recreate the diner and the patrons in Nighthawks as part of a set for his 1976 film Deep Red, aka Profondo Rosso. Ridley Scott has cited the same painting as a visual inspiration for Blade Runner. To establish the lighting of scenes in the 2002 film Road to Perdition, director Sam Mendes drew from the paintings of Hopper as a source of inspiration, particularly New York Movie. Homages to Nighthawks featuring cartoon characters or famous pop culture icons such as James Dean and Marilyn Monroe are often found in poster stores and gift shops. The cable television channel Turner Classic Movies sometimes runs animated clips based on Hopper paintings prior to airing its films. Musical influences include singer-songwriter Tom Waits' 1975 Live in the Studio album titled Nighthawks at the Diner, after the painting. In 1993, Madonna was inspired sufficiently by Hopper's 1941 painting Girly Show that she named her world tour after it and incorporated many of the theatrical elements and mood of the painting into the show. In 2004, British guitarist John Squire, formerly of the Stone Roses, released a concept album based on Hopper's work entitled Marshall's House. Each song on the album is inspired by and shares its title with a painting by Hopper. Hopper died of natural causes in his studio near Washington Square in New York City on May 15, 1967. He was buried 2 days later in the family plot at Oak Hill Cemetery in Nyack, New York, his place of birth. His wife died 10 months later and is buried with him. His wife bequeathed their joint collection of more than 3,000 works to the Whitney Museum of American Art. Papers and drawings in the Hopper home passed into the keeping of family friend Althea Sanborn. Other significant paintings by Hopper are held by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Des Moines Art Center, and the Art Institute of Chicago.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?